Today I'm going to try and describe what it means by a soil's pH value. Now, for me, it's not something I'm that bothered about. I kind of think, well, most plants thrive quite well in all our gardens. Some thrive better than others, as you could expect, but generally, it's not something I worry about. I worry more about the soil type than I would about the pH value. Now, generally in the area that I'm in, we've got probably, I'd say, the average sort of pH value. So it's kind of around 6 to 7, I would have said, but that's without checking it. Now, don't worry too much about your pH value on your soil, because to be quite honest with you, anything sort of 6.5, below 6.5, really, say 6 below, is probably better for acidic plants. So things like the acers, skimmias, etc. And I could just keep going over and over again. So it's ericaceous type plants. If you see that you've got an ericaceous type plant when you buy it, just check it out, and you'll realise that you actually need to put in that type of plant if it's overly done with it. Now, as I said, I don't worry about it. I'm on very heavy, chalky soil. In parts of my garden, I have chalk, and in other parts, I have clay. And it's a bit of a mixture. And up on the Lincolnshire Wolds, we tend to find that we've either got clay, chalk, or sandy soil. If we're at the base of the actual Lincolnshire Wolds, we get lots of sand deposits. Now, if I was a beginner, I wouldn't worry too much about running out and buying one of these testing kits. Just look around at your neighbours, look around the area, and see if you can see what types of plants are growing there. And then take that as a kind of indicator as to what type of soil you've got. So again, don't worry. So 6.5 is best for most plants. 7 and above is kind of missing certain nutrients, and that's what the problem is. It's the nutrients that they're missing. So things like iron is probably missing, and phosphates and all this type of thing. And I'm not going to get technical over it because there's no point. Anything 6 or below is best for your ericaceous plants. So just bear that in mind, but also do not get caught up in it. There's no point. Your average plant that you buy from your garden centres in England, in the UK, will be absolutely fine in your gardens. They're not going to sell you a load of plants that are not going to grow in the average garden. And the average garden in England can well cope with different types of plants, including ericaceous ones. I have acers in my garden that can cope with it, so it's not a problem for that. And there are other things in there that can quite happily cope with it. If you've got things like skimmias and they really are looking chloritic and yellow, then you can get some sort of feed to counterbalance it. No point in trying to add some ericaceous compost into your soil because it will leach out over time. In this case, I would simply feed and keep feeding. Okay, so that's a question that I wanted to answer for somebody who's been following my YouTube or is new to following my YouTube. And another one is they've asked me about shade-tolerant plants, but they've got a semi-shade. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you outside now, and we're going to go through that as well. And we're going to suggest 1 or 2 little plants that'll take it. So I was asked what would be good in a semi-shaded garden. And to answer that question, there's loads of plants that will actually be okay for that type of situation. And I'm going to show you 1 or 2 that would be okay and that aren't invasive as they requested as well. Now, one of your first things is going to be the ferns. They'll always do well in shade. They're not going to produce you flowers, as a lot of shady plants don't. Some do, but on the whole, they tend to be more leaf-like types. So the Brunera would take part shade and a little bit more sun, as would the fern. Now, the other one that would do really well in a partly shaded and sunny area is an astrantia. Now, this one's reflowering. They do have an habit of doing this. If you can cut back early enough in the season, they will reflower and give you another show. But this one will take part shade and it'll take sun. Now, sometimes if you can get certain astrantias into some sun, you do tend to get a little bit of a better colour in the flower and in the leaf, but it will take both sun and shade. So that kind of crosses over. Hostas always do well in part shade. deep shade as well, but in part shade, the yellower colours, or as with this one, it has a yellow type of tip, so this would do well in quite sort of mediocre shade, really. I've had it in heavy shade, and it's doing well in that type of situation. Now, before we move up, is there anything else? Yes, roses. Roses will do very, very well in part shade. Certain ones. Some will not thank you for it, but some will. The climbers tend to do okay, especially for me up here. They tend to do okay in a semi-shaded situation. A little bit of sun just helps to improve the vigour, helps to improve that colour on the flower as well. What else can we show you while we're down here? What would take it? Here we go, look. Right, so let's start. Which one shall I start with? Right, Persicaria polymorpha, that big one there. Now, that would prefer sun, but I've had this in shade before, and it does quite well in shade. So that would be a good choice. Monadas. Now, Monadas would prefer a modicum of sun, a little bit more sun than shade, but also if you can get them on the edge of the shade, that would be okay as well. Now, one that will do well for you in a shaded area is the Sanguisorbas, this one here. They would do quite well. This is past its best now. But again, that would do okay in a shaded area and wouldn't be too invasive. In fact, it wouldn't be invasive at all. Okay, we'll wander further up the garden and see what else we can find. So here I have a euphorbia, and this is Euphorbia purpureum. It goes really purpley colour in as autumn approaches and into winter, and it does really, really nice, and it will do absolutely excellently in a shaded area. So that's the euphorbia. So while we're up this part of the bed, what else would do quite well in shade? Yes, here we go. Look, there's a grass there now. That's called Anamanthial lesoniana. Now that is commonly called the pheasant tail grass, and that will perform really, really nicely in a part shade. It could be a little bit classed as a little bit invasive because it likes to seed around, but that won't cause you a problem because they're dead easy to spot, dead easy to pull out. So that would do really well. Now, I know I'm quite aware that the plants that I'm talking about don't have flowers, and that is one part of the problem. You've got to take the risk as to what will do well in your own garden, because your soil conditions could put a kibosh on that. But on the whole, plants will do okay as long as they're not in too much of an heavy shade. Now, this one here is called Cirsium tuberosum. Now, from my own experience, I've grown this in shade. In fact, this very border here is quite shady, but it does tend to get some sun as well. But it does really well, and it's flowering absolutely lovely at the moment. So that would be okay. And that's a thistle, and that's a native thistle to Britain. It's actually a Scottish thistle. It's not spiky at all like a thistle, but it's much in decline, and but it's a good one to get for that kind of condition. Okay, let's have another wander further up the garden. So I talked about acidity in gardens and ericaceous, and I mentioned acers, briefly mentioned them. Now, this is actually in a shady border, but this is actually half shade and half sun, because as the sun moves around the garden, it tends to pick it back up again. Now, the beauty of these types of things is that in autumn, these produce a stunning colour, and actually this is going into it quite early at the moment. And that's because of the year we've had. We've had a very sunny season, and plants are starting to respond to that. But that would be a good choice for your part shade, and if you're looking for some sort of an autumn colour, you're not going to go far wrong with that one. And that's Acer aconitafolium. Now, while we're up here, we also have grasses that would do well. And again, I'm understanding that, these aren't flowers, and some people are looking for flowers. And if you've got too much shade, then obviously the flowers won't do very well. But this one will do okay. This is called Luzula. Now, there are different varieties of Luzula, and there are other thinner types of Luzula as well. And this is this isn't the snowy woodrush, but there is one called Luzula nivea. This one's called Eiger, and it's more of a broad-leafed one. But this one here is Luzula nivea. Now, it's very small leaf, but these seed heads actually come from its flower head, which is white, which is unusual for a grass, but it produces white seed heads. So it's quite nice, and it would do well in a shaded position or in more of a sunny position. Hakanacloa. I have several Hakanacloas that always do well in either deep shade or or bright sunshine. They won't bother. They won't be bothered about it at all. So they do all right as well. Now, while we're here, we'll go to this. This is Eryngium and Zebeliana. It's grown from seed, so it's very small at the moment. It's not even producing its blue flower as it should. And that's simply because it's in its first, 2 years, and it's only just been planted out this year. Now, this is a good example of what won't look good in any type of shade, part shade or not. You could try it and give it a go. It may do okay for you, but on the whole, it'll not do very well. So try not to go for something like that. Geraniums. Now, geraniums, and I'm talking hardy geraniums. Hardy geraniums do very, very well in shade and in sun. Some do better in bright sunshine, some do better in actual shade itself. But most geraniums, if you look around for the different types of geraniums, and you'll find different species. And as I say, some will do really, really well in sun, some will do really, really well in shade. But all will perform very nicely for you. Now, this one here is in quite a bit of shade, but it would also take the sun lovely as well. But all it's done in the shady part is it's made it a bit of a smaller plant. This one is Geranium Roseanne, possibly one of the best. But look, it's got some beautiful colours. It'd be well worth seeking out. Its plant millennium status was given to it during the when it got to 2000, and it was awarded that sort of title. Now, here's a good example of what might do well on a part sunny, shady border, and this is Pavoskia. So it's called the Russian sage. It really does prefer a sunny spot, but if you've got a part shady spot, if you can get it onto gravel as it is here, it'll probably perform better for you, but not much more than that. Again, we've got other types of geranium here. This one is Johnson's Blue. It's gone through its flowering already. So it's not showing any flowers at all, but that will do really well for you in part shade. Just looking through to see what else would do in shade or part shade for you that wouldn't be too invasive. Some plants are invasive, they will seed around drastically and you will not like that. Here's a nice one, Digitalis foxgloves. I've all heard of those. They do really well in part shade or full sun. This particular one does well in both. It's on the edge of shade here, and it's called Stewartii. Look it up, Digitalis Stewartii, and it's an unusual foxglove. Now it's leaning over one way because it's outdone itself really. It's very sturdy, it's not going to fall over, and it's a perennial. So it's not like usual Digitalis. This one will come back year on year. That'd be a really, really good one if you're looking for some very interesting colour. That would do quite well for you. Again, we've got more geraniums, different types of geranium here. I've too many to remember the names, but again, geraniums do really, really well in part shade, and that'd be okay for you. While we're here, what else can we say? Right, we've got one called Euphorbia Wolfenii over there at the back. Not the flower, the little shrub type looking one there. That one there. Now that will do well in part shade as well. If you get that into more sun, that will go bluer. But it's subspecies, Cariacus subspecies Wolfenii. It's a euphorbia, it's a big euphorbia. The euphorbias are a big family, but that do okay for you in part shade and sun. And it won't be invasive because it goes back to its central clump each time. Short-lived, it'll only make about 4 to 5 years and then you'll have to replace it. But generally it's seeded around and you'll find seedlings. Okay, so as is typical up here on the Lincolnshire Wolds, we're now being attacked by these massive, massive raindrops. So I'm going to just take cover for the minute and we'll just carry on chatting. So, oh God, that's come from nowhere, that. So we're expecting a lot of showers at the moment, which is great for all our gardens. Particularly shade-loving gardens, because you know shade tends to get a little bit less water simply because it's covered by something such as up there, a tree might be covering it and making it a little bit more of a dry area. So plants that do well in shade or part sun, there are so many, too many to count, too many to tell you about. But if I want to recap of some that I would consider well worth having, it would be a geranium. Think carefully, look through the magazines, see which types of geranium you like. There are spreaders, there are clumpers, there are invasive species, so choose carefully, but that will always do well for you. Hostas will always do well in a part shady area. If you've got the parts on part shade, I tend to go for the bluer forms because they will blue up better if they're getting a little bit more sun than you'd expect. Now, one down here, that's called guacamole. That's an hosta, but that would prefer to be in more of a shady position, which it is down there. I've also got Erysimum Bowles Mauve down there. It's only a tiny, tiny little plant at the moment. Now, that will do okay in part shade and part sun, and that makes a beautiful sub-shrub. So it kind of goes woody as it gets older, produces a mauve-coloured flower that never stops flowering. If you're looking for a flower that just continually goes through, including through winter, then choose that one. Now, the purpley colour over there, that's the colour that Bowles Mauve produces. Exactly that colour. That is not, obviously, an Erysimum. But that's the colour. So, choosing them, you've just got to really think about it. You need to make your mind up what type of style you want. If you're looking for a particular style, such as a woodland style, then your choices are going to be less. If you've got a really ericaceous soil, your choices are going to be less again. If you have a sort of a balanced type of soil, as we do up here at Grassy Bottom, then you'll be okay with most stuff, including going into part shade and sun. As for the invasiveness, you've really got to choose carefully. Certain species will, if they like your section or like your garden, they may just be more invasive than you realised. But on the whole, there's no such thing as an invasive plant, only a gardener who doesn't know how to control it. And that's a mantra I go by all the time. So hopefully that's helped you along with the pH values. Again, don't worry too much about your pH values in your garden. No point in worrying about it. On the average garden in Britain, most stuff will grow. Not everything. Hope that's helped you along. Any more questions, fire them along to me, and if I can do a little YouTube on it for you, I will do. Talk to you later. Ta-da.